Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've had a heavy lunch, hopefully not falling asleep. But I promise you that this session is going to be quite a session because I believe there's going to be a lot of contra views on the session. And we're talking about sustainability. Now, the good news is that most companies and most corporates today are becoming, very, very conscious about the way they're conducting business. But the fact of the matter is it enough? The gentleman and the one lady on the dais today will be addressing the complexities of actually integrating sustainable goals along with profitability and how is the current ecosystem poised today to ensure that while we chase this 5 trillion economy, how do we do it sustainably? And with that, I'd like to pose the first question to you, Mohan. And if you could tell me, are sustainable goals today part of the business agenda?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we don't really have an alternative, but to make it part of the business agenda. What we've seen over the last decades is the way we consume resources on this planet. We've gone from being kind of self-sufficient in terms of what the earth produces in a year that we consume in a year to somewhere around 45% deficit as of today. With that in mind, we are at a point in time where we probably have a year or two to reverse this. Yeah. So corporates have no option but to be part very much of this agenda.
But have business issues really converged with, sustainability goals? Have the issues converged?
To a large extent, it's converged because there are no options. And I mean, you look at what's happening today around us in the world. The last major economy which went through a massive growth, and it has happened all over the planet. And in the last 20 years in China, what happened with their massive growth? And someone mentioned this morning about China being at the same level as India about 40 years ago, and now they have 4 times the per capita income. And in the last 3 years, you had society actually revolting in many cities in China where the government had to step in and step into taking measures into making sure that manufacturing is done in a more responsible way. And for us now in India, with this 5 trillion economy target and about 1 trillion in manufacturing, that sets the agenda for us that we have no other way but not to replicate the China model and go in a more responsible way as to how we use our resources and how we make sure that society progresses in the way it should.
Right. My next question is to all the corporates sitting on this panel. So we have Glaxo, we have Parle, we have BASF. While we know that corporates have this quarter se quarter tak mantra, so you're really chasing the quarterly profits. What are the trade-offs in terms of chasing that quarterly result and investing sustainably for 1 to 3 years to actually see the impact?
Well, firstly, quarterly results put huge pressure on us, and when you have to really achieve that, you don't really look at anything else. However, if you look at the recent past, things are changing, and while there are compulsions in terms of getting those numbers every quarter, what we are also looking at is the long-term impact of it. And that's the reason why if you look at most corporates, they have started. So you'll see this coming from many corporates where they are saying that this is more for a longer run. The strategies that are deployed are more for longer run, more sustainable results, sustainable growth, rather than probably looking at just a quarterly number. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would also like to say let's try and understand one thing. Given the situation, right now the situation is such, if we are talking about the $5 trillion aspiration of India, there are 2 aspects to the entire thing. One is, how do you grow, okay? And second is, how do you grow sustainably without really having minimal or no impact on environment? So to my mind, I think, while there is enough and more to be done on the first front, which is, how do you grow? what should be your strategies to grow, and can we grow? So I think, probably right now what we are going through is, or more of the mindset of corporate India is looking at a linear growth, where we think that, okay, pre-1991, there was no liberalization and we were in a license raj. And now that, if we increase our capacities, we'll grow. That's not the case. I think, things have to be done differently. The consumer is very different. Probably we are still in that mindset of just increasing our capacities, pushing more, at whatever cost in the market and getting the growth. That's the first part. The second part is where the consumer today is ready to take that, and that's where, the environment or sustainable thing comes in. If you're looking at the new generation which is coming up, they're far more aware. They're looking at things which are, made or manufactured without having really much or minimal impact on environment. And that's where I think, lies the trick we need to look into. And I heard that, even in the earlier discussion, where I think we need to be more innovative. We need to invest in those kind of technologies that might be, not a short-term thing. We may see a short-term impact of that, but in long term, and as you rightly said, without really, replicating the China model, we need to look at doing things differently, innovatively, so as to see that we have minimal impact on the environment. And that's where the second thing lies. I mean, looking at the consumer differently.
So very quickly, so would you say right now, in terms of achieving our sustainability goals, we are behind the curve?
No, I would not say we are behind the curves. We are, very much on it. But what I feel is that, that change would probably happen at the pace which is desired, provided we keep thinking like that without really, getting lost into, as I said earlier, just a linear growth.
Sure. Vaidheesh, let me put you on the spot. Would you say that all stakeholders, which is essentially corporations, civil society, and the government, are today currently on the same page in terms of pushing the sustainability agenda? Or would you say that, there is some work to be done to ensure that the ecosystem is much more conducive to actually give this sustainability agenda an impetus?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we need to recognize the fact that, sorry. So we are in a healthcare industry, and we need to recognize the fact in 1947, average longevity of our country is 45. Today we are at 68.5. Now we need to remember the fact that we have progressed quite significantly, and there are people who are living at 80s and 90s, right? So the way in which we have progressed in the past is very different from the way in which we are going to progress in the future. Because the ecosystem of payer, provider, policymakers, patients, physicians, and playmakers like pharmaceutical industry, medical device industry, or the NGOs. Now, unfortunate part about the way in which it's happening is each of the stakeholders are trying to optimize their revenue model or their expectation, which is very different from the developed world. Developed world, the healthcare system is highly integrated with all the members of the ecosystem are integrated. So one of the very recent phenomena, what you're seeing in India, is the integration is, I must say, wonderful thing that has happened with Ayushman Bharat, where there is a big attempt to integrate the various stakeholders where each one of their interests are trying to get aligned. Are we in a good shape today? I don't think so, fully. But are we going forward in the direction? I think it's a brilliant direction. My sense is that Ayushman Bharat 2.0 and 3.0 is where you're going to see a far more integration, where the real middle class population who has to get the benefit. Right now, the below poverty line, they are getting the benefit out of this whole program through the integration. But I only hope that 2.0 and 3.0, which currently we are all engaged in, which is going to make a huge difference towards what you are talking about, $5 trillion economy, where people are going to live even incremental 5 years, adding life, which will increase your economy by at least to the extent of 800 billion to $1 trillion. So you're going to see a quality living in this country is going to add significant. So health and well-being as an agenda in the country is a significant part of our economic agenda.
Let me come to you as the former secretary of NITI Aayog. Give me your point of view. What is your view on how corporations have taken on this effort to, ensure that their businesses are more sustainable and have moved to, take, make, and dispose to take, make, and reuse or recycle. How much of that are you happy with and you've seen in terms of their, their actionable agenda? And do you think the government has done enough actually to incentivize corporations to ensure that they can take it, forward in a way that is, much more speedier?
Yeah, so I think the forum is very well set, and we've had three distinguished corporate sector viewpoints, and I completely agree with my colleague on the left from Glaxo that the way over the last 4-5 years, some structural changes, even in making development the mass movement, has had very strong reception and very well received by the corporate sector. He mentioned Ayushman Bharat, and I'd respond to that straight away. I think it is a beautiful example of public-private partnership, how a very well-focused public policy got the private sector to be completely enthused to invest. There is an insurance model. Of course, it is addressing the poorer segment of our country and the missing middle. There is a large middle class still in India that should go ahead and buy insurance policies. And since we are talking in the context of an economic conclave, I think the way forward is when corporates completely get aligned that development is very good business.
Are they not aligned right now?
And no, so they're aligned, and I would compliment the corporates. I think they're completely clear that this is the way forward. So sustainable developmental goals, there are 17, but the last goal, 17th goal, is about partnerships. And I think beginning with that last goal and bringing that upfront about partnerships, and the first powerful partnership that we can see in India is the corporate sector aligning to health, education, and nutrition. Large number of startups, if you see some of the startups working either in fintech or in agri-tech or in health tech, I think they're all leveraging on a very strong platform of public goods, the Aadhaar, the Jan Dhan, the bank accounts. So they're all triangulating and delivering on health, education, and nutrition. So I think the stage is very well set for Indian corporates to go global, go to scale and size, while at the same time addressing the needs of the Indian population. 300 million Indians have come out of poverty. This is a figure we don't talk about, but I think we should be very proud of this fact that without a strong partnership between private and public sector wouldn't have been possible.
Let me play devil's advocate, with this very rosy narrative and get in Vandana, who really speaks her mind and says it as it is. Would you be, in agreement with what he said in terms of this partnership that we're talking about is, the best we've ever seen, and we're very happy with our ecosystem because, all stakeholders are aligned, or do we have a long journey ahead?
So as you know, I look at the energy sector, and nowhere is the attention to environmental sustainability bigger than in the energy sector. The oil and gas companies the world over, and even national oil companies in countries like India, everybody, all of them are under the spotlight. So is the corporate sector doing enough? And I also look at petrochemical companies and how they are throwing their weight behind recycling and so on. Yes, the corporate sector is doing enough. I think they don't have a choice. They have the shareholders, they have consumers, they have investors, everybody scrutinizing them. My thought on this is that it's a huge field, sustainability. There's a lot of stakeholders and there's a lot of moving parts. The real challenge, I think, for the world, and certainly for India as well, is what brings them all together. And here I think maybe a contrarian view, but I think the government here has to play a key role. Somebody needs to set the framework that this is how we are going to move, this is what every element of this ecosystem needs to do. Set some sort of targets, penalties and rewards, and I think that, to my mind, is right now the missing piece.
Right.
May I step
You have a
in?
contra view?
No, not a contra view, but I think it goes beyond that, in my opinion. I mean, the corporates, like you correctly said, I mean, with Alliance to End Plastic Waste, where BASF is also a founding member, I mean, 40 of us actually came together and said we have to work globally, and also in India we are active. There will be the big launch in mid-Feb or so. Along with that, what we need is the ecosystem which is infrastructure, where yes, government as well as corporates can contribute for the collection, for the recycling, and then the reuse. But lastly, it's also social, right? I mean, all of us as individuals, it's not very uncommon to see plastic bottles being chucked out
Absolutely,
of
yeah.
whatever vehicle you're traveling. So it's a combination of all three. And unless all three get together, I don't see us making progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the government is the point I'm making. I think it's the government's role to bring them all together. Corporates will always be driven by profit. You can't blame them for that.
Let me come to you, Dr. Prodipto. Would you say civil society, the awareness level and the education level among civil society is at a level which is desirable, or do you think that has to be prioritized?
Well, I think the civil society in India is active, in some instances hyperactive, but I do not think that most of them go about their agenda after having done their homework and with their efforts and prescriptions backed up by proper research. Now, having said that, let me respond briefly to what Vandana said and
Sure.
some of the others have said about the Indian corporates being very responsible when it comes to sustainability. I think this is true of the large Indian corporate sector. So there they have to give their annual reports, there is naming and shaming, there is strong government regulation. But let us remember that 50% of our industry comes from MSMEs who do not face this kind of scrutiny and who are largely outside the regulatory framework. And if you go to the MSMEs, you'll see, technologies which are horrendously polluting, which are extremely energy inefficient, which are extremely wasteful of water, which generate huge amounts of industrial waste which are disposed of improperly. And I think that is a very big area for both the public sector and the private sector to address. Now, you mentioned something about the role of government. And here I would like to just put across a thought. And that is that when it comes to sustainability issues strictly outside the economic growth dimension, then there are various either trade-offs or synergies. You cannot say a priori where there will be a synergy, where there will be a trade-off. For example, if it's a question of addressing the 500 million tons of coal equivalent of agricultural waste that we have in this country each year, certainly there will probably be synergies in terms of the growth. There's a huge growth potential that lies there, right? But when it comes to municipal solid waste, I think that there are some trade-offs, because no matter how much wealth we try to derive out of this municipal waste, and let us remember, municipal waste, the nitrogen content of our municipal waste is as large as our entire fertilizer industry. But there you would need, side payments to the corporates concerned to actually produce, to extract the nitrogen from this municipal waste, to put it in a usable form for the farmers. And therein is the talisman that we need to put in place a system by which societal costs and societal benefits, they are transmitted through the policy and regulatory regime to the economic actors. And then thereafter, it is the responsibility of actors to develop the financial models and the business models to take account and to respond to this regulatory framework.
Sure. Let me ask a question to the three corporates who are sitting here. While undoubtedly we've got some, key insights into the fact that the government needs to play the pivotal role here, as people who are leading this disruptive business model, given that we're living in a new environment, in a new business environment, and in a new climate environment, what how do you foresee the role of corporations in terms of taking center stage in shaping policy?
So, policy I think it's about implementation, about level playing fields. Yeah. What you just mentioned about 50% of the people being outside the regulatory framework. So there we would definitely, as a corporate, would want a level playing field. To make sure that we are operating in a sustainable way and reducing our emissions, we need to invest significant amounts of capital into technology, innovation, upgrading our products, making sure our supply chains are quite robust and as short as possible. And all this will then contribute. But then if there's no level playing field, because in the end, like you said, we also have to make sure on a quarterly basis deliver, so have to remain competitive in the market, the level playing field is absolutely required. So from a policy perspective, making sure that there is a level playing field, the rules and regulations that are in place are enforced everywhere, are some of the topics which would be on top of my mind.
But this would be an aspiration. My point is, how do we, ensure whatever you just stated, actually fructifies into something?
See, for example, I would say in our industry, the future of the industry is in innovation. But it's not very easy for government also to understand what does it take to make the innovation happen. For example, in our industry, biological is the future. Like all the new drugs that are coming in, they're all biologic. They're all antibody-based drugs. Now, as far as India is concerned, we don't even have a clue as to what kind of innovation we need to do here. Whereas China has already taken a 10-year leap in future of medicines is all going to be there, right? So it's our responsibility to help our regulators and policymakers to understand what does it. So we as an industry trying to not make them understand and also help. How do we set up the innovation park, genome valleys, right? Is it easy to do it? Not easy to do, get funding for all this. So one of the things that you need to remember is, which is, I guess everyone need to understand, industry should make profits. And the profits are meant to put back into innovation and go towards, if you want a $5 trillion economy, you need the industry to grow. So this is the only dichotomy you sometimes feel, is that you want innovation, but you don't have money to pay for the innovation. So somewhere down the line, there has to be a sense of urgency toward making the organization viable so that they are able to put money back into something which is important to society.
Sure.
That's something we need to bring that. Otherwise, this $5 trillion economy is likely to be a bit of a challenge. Yeah. So we need to find a way to work towards a symbiotic relationship to make sure we all put money back, put back into society, back into innovation, rather than saying everything has to be only towards social cost. Social cost is important, but unless otherwise I get something to put it back.
Absolutely.
Just to take his point forward, he talked about MSMEs and level playing field of MSMEs and, educating the consumers. So on both the things, I mean, what I'd like to add from our side is that, there's a big change that's happening. We work very closely with, younger generation kids. And what we're seeing is, and those are, early signs, is that the kind of awareness at that level is phenomenal. So, unless even the MSMEs don't change, and don't be compliant with the norms and be sustainable, I think it would be really difficult for them to survive. Given the awareness that's coming up, we are the generation which, we were not probably taught or, when we were studying, probably the situation was not such grave. This kind of things were not. But today's generation is brought up completely differently. The way they are aware about these things, these problems, the way they are, talking about it, the way they are making their choices, I think, we'll see a sudden change in the consumer behavior in the years to come, where these things would become very, very important. And I think, while, yes, I completely agree on your level playing field part, but I think, that consumer awareness, which is thankfully right now happening, given, the education, kind of education that's being imparted, kind of things which kids are doing and schools are doing, to ensure that, there is awareness about it among children, the younger generation.
Well, I need to wrap this discussion up, but before I do, Vandana, why don't you, give us a sense before we close in terms of where we stand today. When I say we, I mean the country, India, if I juxtapose it, with the world. Where do we stand when we talk about sustainability goals? How, how behind on or on the forefront are we? And what do you suggest we do to, close that gap?
So it's very interesting that attention is shifting now to China and India as the biggest contributors of global energy demand growth. As to what these countries are going to do, are they going to pollute like the Western world did while they were developing, or are they going to hop onto the sustainability bandwagon, which they are doing? Again, I have a slightly contrarian view, if you will, on this. I think India does need to, and I think what happened at COP25 is a very clear signal that even the rich countries are afraid of carbon taxes. Sustainability, environmentalism comes at a cost. So India has to ask itself, is India ready to pay that cost? But going to the main point, I think in sistenablity in India has to keep energy poverty alleviation squarely in its sight. So as Prodipto said, MSMEs, and you talked about level playing fields. So the richer corporates may have the means to be sustainable and to take all the necessary measures. But do the MSMEs even know? Are they even educated? Do they need to do they? So I think removing poverty and removing energy poverty has to be the central goal of sustainability for India.
Fair enough.
Yeah, if I may only add, India, we should be proud that our sustainability on energy is, talked around the world. 175 gigawatts of renewable energy is what, and our Prime Minister recently also committed it would go up to nearly 400, 450 gigawatts. So I think we are really the most outstanding example of corporates trying to also understand that the energy that they would use is sustainable. We're the green energy vision. We set up the International Solar Alliance, and I think the kind of model we have laid out already, we are well on track under the SDGs to achieve India's targets on the pollution intensity of our GDP. We would be really achieving them, but the shame is that the developed world is not doing its part of the heavy lifting. So I think one of the things this panel ought to have spent a little time looking at is the kind of disaster that happened in COP25 we just concluded yesterday. And a large number of developing countries were fully supportive of the role that India has been playing. But the rest of the world, unfortunately, the developed part of the world is not, doing the heavy lifting when it comes to SDGs. So I think that's what our Indian corporates should be justifiably proud of. And as they market and go global, they should use this as a USP that we are completely committed as a corporate aligning to SDGs
Sure.
and sustainable development.
Yeah. Noted. We can pat ourselves on the back, but we also know we have miles to go before we sleep. And on that note, thank you very much, lady and gentlemen, and thank you for being a wonderful audience.